Welcome, everyone, to the TLGS 2022 conference. My name is Corrine Bishop from the University of Central Florida. I'll be collecting questions in the chat for this session, which is called Beyond Misinformation, Educating Graduate Students About the Mischaracterization and Misappropriation of Research. Our presenters.
All right. Good afternoon. I'm Wynn Watson, and I'm the social science librarian at Syracuse University Libraries. And today I'm going to be talking about a workshop I created for graduate students about the mischaracterization and misappropriation of research. So before I begin, I would like to acknowledge with respect the Onondaga Nation, firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous peoples on whose ancestral lands Syracuse University now stands. So we've certainly heard plenty about misinformation and disinformation over the past 7 years, though the problem is certainly as old as information itself. Folks have probably seen the terms defined, but for the purpose of this presentation, I'll define misinformation as false information that an individual or group may consume or share that they don't necessarily know is false. And disinformation is false information that's created with the purpose of misleading others by someone who knows that the information they're creating is false. So the issue with false information is, of course, its effect on society. And much of the US media's focus on false information has been on how it increases distrust or hostility toward authority and fellow citizens, possibly leading to social breakdown. So we've seen this with false information related to COVID-19 or the 2020 presidential election. My interest in misinformation and in disinformation, though, actually started with a different contested election, the 2009 Iranian presidential election. And in that one, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was reelected as president of Iran, but millions of votes were counted by hand so quickly that it would defy the laws of physics, and the official district level data vote totals showed the telltale signs of data fabrication. But at the time, the US media were covering how individuals were organizing protests in Iran over Twitter. And I decided to take a look at the messages that were going on out on Twitter and found an interesting phenomenon. So person A would say, at this date and this time and this location, we're going to have a protest. And then person B would respond by saying, person A is a puppet of the regime and it's a trap. And then person A would respond and say that person B was with the regime and then it wasn't a trap. And so in truth, both of them could have been with the Iranian regime, but the effect of this confusion would be for Iranians to stay home because that was the safe choice. And that's another effect or goal of misinformation and disinformation, and that is to suppress active citizenship by encouraging defensive inaction. So as we've seen, misinformation and disinformation creep into the public's understanding of research, and this can take a few different forms. So first, there's what I call the misunderstanding of research, which is somewhat akin to misinformation. So with misunderstanding of research, an individual comes to faulty conclusions about research either on their own, or they'll adopt the faulty conclusions of an indirect source of information about the research. They can then spread those faulty conclusions onto others. Mischaracterization and misappropriation of research are somewhat more akin to disinformation. So mischaracterizing research I define as misrepresenting the conclusions of research, or doing a misleading selective representation of the research. And this is usually done to support an ideological agenda or political actions. As an example, I give reports about unauthorized immigration. You'll often see them discuss the number of arrests by the Border Patrol. However, one person could be arrested multiple times over, say, the course of a single month, and each arrest does not necessarily constitute a unique individual. There's some political figures who know about this distinction, but to advance their agenda, they feed the narrative that these are unique individuals. Misappropriating research usually entails a reasonably accurate representation of the research, but in support of an ideological agenda or political actions that the researcher actually does not advocate for. So, for example, when the Census Bureau reported that the 2020 census showed that the white population in the US had decreased from between 2010 and 2020, that likely provided white supremacist groups with information that they used for their agendas, even though, having personally met people who work for the Census Bureau, I know that this is not an agenda that they would want their research to be used for. So, unfortunately, the misunderstanding, mischaracterization, and misappropriation of research can often have some very troubling consequences for research, such as harassment or bullying, or even violence or threats of violence. So, just some examples here, and I have all of these, up here so that folks can, visit them when the slides come out. There's a historian of ancient India named Ramala Thapar. She's been in contention for years with the Hindu nationalist movement that's currently in power in India. So the Hindu nationalists, in order to bolster their definition of Indian citizenship that excludes Muslims and Christians, and their belief that Hinduism is the root of worldwide civilization, they've created textbooks for children throughout India that are historically inaccurate. And this is for the purpose of basically advancing their agenda. So Ramala Thapar has pushed back against this. And as a result, she's been at the receiving ends of death threats for years. And then more recently in the US, there's a medieval historian named Dorothy Kim, who was pushing back on the narratives about the crusades that are pushed by the alt-right in the United States in order to advance their white nationalist agenda. And as a result of her pushing back, she was doxxed by the far-right provocateur Milo Yiannopoulos and harassed by various members of the alt-right online community. So basically, to do this, to kind of combat this, I created this workshop on the misappropriation and mischaracterization of research to help train graduate students and faculty, for that matter, to prepare for such situations and how they might respond. So, with regard to the all right. Okay, so part of the series, it's this workshop is part of a series for Syracuse Library's Learn at SUL workshop series. So there's been 3 iterations so far in spring 2021 and fall 2021 and this past spring. So basically, the workshops are about 50 to 60 minutes in length. They're geared toward both faculty and graduate students, but the participants have all been graduate students, though at one workshop I did have an undergraduate student come. So with regard to the content of the workshop, I start with a content advisory that some of what we will cover might be upsetting and that participants may leave if they need to. And I have a disclaimer that about what the workshop is designed to do and what it's not designed to do. It's a complicated topic, and I encourage participants to get the expertise of others who might have different training and lived experiences than I do. I open with questions about common misconceptions about their field of research and some specific examples they have of research in their field getting misunderstood. And then I continue with the why of the workshop, which is essentially what I just shared with all of you. And then I share a video of an exchange between Dr. Anthony Fauci and Senator Rand Paul during a March 2021 Senate committee hearing, which looks extremely prescient now. As I show it, I ask students to take notes of what techniques Dr. Fauci is using to counter the narrative that Senator Paul is trying to push, and certainly worth looking at if you are interested in looking at the video. So then I start getting into the strategies. And first and foremost, I encourage participants to use the classroom where they might be teaching as a trial run. The assumption is that the general public will have at most the understanding of their field of research that undergraduates do. And I tell workshop participants to ask students in their courses or sections about what they might have heard about their topic. And this derives from my own experience. I taught political science at various community colleges around the Midwest for 6 years, and I was thrown a lot of ideologically slanted information, some of it true, some of it false, and I often had to respond to it. And there were some approaches that I developed to that that I share with workshop participants, and that I'll share here momentarily. So the undergraduate classroom, like I say, can be a good place to do trial runs for preparation, but I also make a plug for the resources that the library has available that can help graduate students keep current with their field, both within scholarly communication and in the news and on social media. So I plug different databases that have bibliographic and alert features that will let them see what research and researchers are having an impact on their field, and within the realm of scholarly communication. So this obviously is beneficial for them for multiple reasons, not just for the purview of this workshop, but to keep current in their field. I also talk about how they can similarly use those tools as well as institutional repositories, research profile platforms to track their own research and what is being said about their own research. And then outside of scholarly communication, I talk about following individuals and threads on social media, getting news alerts that might help them keep tabs on the public media and popular discourses about their field of research. So I offer participants some strategies for handling situations when they come up. And again, I advise them to practice these in a classroom setting, again, which is where I developed them. One suggestion is to find a grain of truth in the falsehood and to correct that misunderstanding. So some recent examples I have here, there's an op-ed from the Washington Post where a nursing home administrator had employees who were hesitant to get vaccinated against COVID-19. So some of their worries, they said, were that it might alter their DNA or it might put them a microchip in them that would track them. And he explained the mechanism of how an mRNA vaccine works and differentiated that from the alteration of DNA. And he also talked about a tracking microchip on the packaging for the vaccine to make sure it was getting from point A to point B, but that there was not one in the vaccine itself. So I give another example here of statistics on contraception effectiveness. As an adolescent, I was told that condoms failed to prevent pregnancy 1 out of 6 times, basically 16%. So this link is from the Guttmacher Institute. It's a think tank and research organization that specializes in reproductive health research. And it turns out that the 1 out of 6 failure is from, quote unquote, typical use, according to their statistics, with quote unquote perfect use, the failure rate of condoms to prevent pregnancy is 2%, not 16%. So when you're employing these, an audience might be skeptical about the information you're showing them, especially if it's contradicting their worldview. And that's why I recommend, if you can, take an organization or individual that provides accurate information about the particular issue at hand, and show that organization or individual also providing information that has been used to support other causes that the audience, in this case, people who are misinformed, support. And so that was the case with the Guttmacher Institute statistics. A student in one of my classes was providing inaccurate statistics about contraception to the entire class. I showed that information on the link that I have on this slide, and then I showed the statistics on the number of abortions in the US since Roe v. Wade that the Guttmacher Institute has published. The Guttmacher Institute itself supports legal abortion, but anti-abortion groups have used their statistics in their arguments against abortion, which was the view held by the particular student who was passing on incorrect information. So in some ways, the Guttmacher Institute could see this as misappropriation of their research, but I wanted students to trust the information I was showing them. I worried that the inaccurate statistics that the one student was providing could affect other students' decisions and behavior. So the foundation of all this is recognizing sort of what the debate over false information is really about on the social and political level. And for example, the debate about that we see now about masks and vaccines, not really about the masks or the vaccines. And I recommend participants that they familiarize themselves with the belief system in which the misunderstanding, mischaracterization of research is arising. And then, if they find themselves in a situation where they need to correct, they can employ empathy in a dialogue in which they respectfully contextualize a particular false belief in a larger belief system and lived experience. So this might help, at least with moving on from the false belief in question. But again, returning to the contraception example, in this case, I discussed the efforts by religious groups to promote abstinence-only approaches, but added that not everyone will follow the recommendation, however well-intentioned, and that this can lead to adverse consequences. In the workshop, I also talked about possibly putting everything into the larger debate into a wider historical and comparative cultural context. So people might begin to think more broadly about their belief system if they begin to hear about analogs from another time and or place. So for example, information about the similarities between what was happening or what people were thinking during the 1918 flu pandemic and what is happening today might be helpful in broadening people's thinking about COVID-19. Also talking about immigration and say that's taking place from one country in sub-Saharan Africa to another in sub-Saharan Africa and associated attitudes there might help people think more broadly or critically about how they're thinking about immigration in the United States. So at the conclusion of the workshop, I emphasized to students, again, that if they're being harassed or feel unsafe, they should let their supervisor or someone else who is in authority at their current or future institution know. So that's something that's situational. And then again, I advised my disclaimer was best addressed by individuals who have that expertise. I also underscored that the success of any strategy is dependent on the interplay between the identity characteristics of the researcher and the identity characteristics of the audience in the situation. When I was using these strategies in my classrooms, I was a white male speaking to classrooms that mostly consisted of white conservative students. Had I not been a white male or had my class looked different, there might have been a need for different strategies. And as you might have noticed, the two examples of bullying that I gave were both of women being harassed by far-right males, and I don't think that is a coincidence. So I add that caveat to my students at the end, and I'll share some more thoughts on that at the close of this presentation. So the feedback that I received about the workshop has generally been positive. Some examples of what students have identified as the most valuable from what they learned include the citation tracking, which obviously is helpful for research in general, and the idea of familiarizing themselves with the cultural and social context of people's misconceptions. Another thing that we ask on our workshop, standardized workshop form, is about what they learned in these workshops that will change how they do their research going forward. And some responses there included incorporating consideration of public communications into how they do research, and also the strategy of using the undergraduate classroom for trial runs of explaining their research in more accessible terms. So in terms of takeaways, future directions, I found that students want to have more than just a workshop. They want to have in-depth conversations about this topic. And it's interesting because during the most recent iteration, which I taught a few weeks ago, we ended up staying for 20 minutes extra after the workshop was due to end, because students wanted to talk more about the topic. I plan on teaching it again in the fall of 2022 and spring of 2023. But again, coming back to that caveat I left workshop participants with, addressing this issue is going to require dialogue and collaboration that includes a diverse array of perspectives and lived experiences. And I'm cognizant that there are limitations to what I can teach students based on my own perspective and lived experience, and that I'm going to be unaware of many of those limitations until someone points them out to me. And I guess kind of a call out there. Consequently, I'm looking for potential collaborators, both within my own institution, but also collaborators at other institutions who are interested in defending research from misappropriation and mischaracterization, and interested in defending researchers from bullying and harassment.
Thank you for that great presentation. Do we have any questions? You kind of answered my question with your last comment, but I was wondering if you partnered with any other campus units. I know at UCF we have a faculty that teach something similar, and it's certainly a topic that disciplines have different perspectives or whatever.
Yeah, well, I am definitely seeking people out. One of these things is that I've sort of been focused on kind of getting a feel for my own approach to things before necessarily reaching out to other folks. But that is something that I, really want to do because it's very much necessary.
Thanks. So we have a question. I'm a little bit confused about the workshop audience and the topic. Scholarly miscommunication and communication in public arena are different.
So it's basically, the idea here is that it's more what is being said in public. So the audience, like I say, has mostly been graduate students. And the idea is to, it's mostly about what is going on in public. And the original title was the public in your publications, though it changed it because I thought it might not be descriptive enough. But, there is, I think, paying attention to scholarly communication is part of this. And that's why I talked about the tools that the library has available, because I think part of this is about keeping current in the field to know what's going on in the field, but there's also having to keep current on what's going on outside the world of scholarly communication, how the general public audience is talking about a particular field of research. But first, you have to be prepared to know what your field of research is saying. And that is something interesting that students got out of when I asked questions about the Dr. Fauci video. That is something that people mentioned there is the degree of preparation and sort of, again, anticipating what questions, being able to, with his knowledge of the research that's out there, essentially say things about what Senator Paul was saying that were not necessarily inaccurate, but kind of warped what actually is going on there. And so I think preparation includes, not just having, tactics for, addressing situations, but also knowing what one's field of research is saying, as well as what the public might be saying about that. Did I answer that question?
That question was from Olga, so I think you did. We do have another question that that was just posted, so I'll go ahead and ask that. I'm wondering if you have students in any particular discipline who were personally worried that their own research area might be a viable target, such as public health or other disciplines.
So the students, some of the students that have recently come tend to be, so there was somebody who works in anthropology. There was a student who basically does evolutionary biology. So there's a wide array, but I think the students who have come, I've noticed, have already had some experience with this, oftentimes with family members who don't quite, understand, who have misconceptions about their research. And that's something that I have noticed, is that their own background and lived experience has included misunderstandings of their research and their field of research. And it's those misunderstandings for them have often been with family members or others close to them.
Thank you. We have about a minute left. If we have one other question. I don't see any in the chat right now. Thank you for a great presentation. All right. Thank you.